Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm John Campbell, Chair of the Tenant Services Committee at Toronto Community Housing, and we're here in Committee Room 2 at Toronto City Hall. Welcome. I'm joined by two members of the committee, and we have one member online, and so welcome to those who are attending online. I'll ask for a motion to approve the public agenda. Moved by Mohammed?
We haven't started the next
We haven't started? Okay, well, we can still approve the agenda, can't we? All right. We're good? We're on? Okay. All right, so a motion to approve the agenda moved by Mohammed. All in favor? Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? All right, seeing none. I need a motion to approve the meeting minutes of February the 17th, our last meeting. Motion to approve the meeting minutes. Mohammed, all in favor? Thank you. And then I will ask for items to be held, and I'll just say that I wish to hold, I'll say what I wish to hold, and then other committee members can offer. We have a deputant on item number 5. We will be holding number 6 as well, the Office of Commissioner of Housing Equity biannual update, where we have a deputant. And then I will ask that number 10, the Chief Operating Officer's reports be held. And that's A, B, and C, and I will ask if any members wish to hold any other items on the agenda. I'll give you a moment to look at the rest of the agenda. So that would be items 7, 8, and 9. And we don't have any other presentations planned, do we? On any of those items? No?
No, we have a deputant on item 10B, but you've held that as well.
I've held that, okay. Right, okay, so I'll have a motion then to approve items 7, 8, and 9, please. Okay. Marcel, do you want to make that motion? Marcel's made that motion. All in favor? Okay, that's passed. And so we'll move on to the items in business arising, where we have, which is found on page 15, and we have a deputant. There we are. Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Fabulous. And yourself?
Great. So we're on to the items in business arising, which is number 5, and we understand you have some comments, so please feel free to begin.
Excellent. Thank you. So on the briefing note, action item number 1, with regards to participatory budgeting, I'm really not in favor of removing it from this action item list for a couple of reasons. The action item list belongs to the entire committee, so typically the members would agree upon the items that appear on it, and whereas the chair of the committee, as we know, is responsible for approving agenda items as they come forward. The action item list is a placeholder for board and committee members on matters that have arisen where they believe additional information is necessary, or request a report or briefing note to be brought back until the completion of the report. This is a particularly important year for us because there will be new board and committee members coming forward, so they'll not be familiar with previous programs. The briefing note is a bit vague and difficult to follow, or maybe it was just me, but it really doesn't provide an indication of what the future event that the action item is conditional upon. So I'm not quite figured out what that is. But I do know that in February of last year, the Tenant Services Committee received a report on the participatory budgeting program indicating, as we already know, the program was paused in early 2020 to allow for a comprehensive review, and regular updates would be provided to the Tenant Services Committee. In March of last year, the following month, the Tenant Services Committee received a detailed briefing note indicating step by step how Toronto Community Housing would review the program, reconsider the program name with a direction to appropriately rename the program, and staff would be working to align participatory budgeting with the new tenant hubs. So participatory budget reform would be completed in 2022. Implementation will start in 2023. With this in mind, I'm not sure why we would remove the participatory budgeting item from the action item list, as staff have not presented the revised process to the Tenant Services Committee. This item is also not on the annual work plan. The PB process is probably the most important program to tenants as they make independent requests on behalf of their communities. So at this time, the tenants only know the program is under review, but it will come back. So perhaps management might, edit the action item list to say that the status of the PB program is that the program is currently under review, and then it could remain on the action item list. That said, it's been 3 years since this program was paused. Wouldn't be unreasonable for this committee to, anticipate a timeline when management will be bringing back a report to this committee for consideration, and a timeline around when the participatory budgeting program will be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant?
Yes, I do.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning.
Participatory budgeting program had a number of different lives. One was an actual participatory budgeting on major programs in communities, capital projects, was it not?
Originally, yes.
So would you agree with me that and then the next phase of that was receiving and ordering different things for the community? They were no longer capital projects or improvements to the property, improvements to the building. They were TV or these kinds of things for tenants' use.
Yes, that's true.
So the nature of participatory budgeting, and I agree with you, clearly participatory budgeting is actual budgeting for capital dollars. And so I'm going to ask later if the tenant action funds cover off some of the things that I'll call it in the phase 2 part of misnamed participatory budgeting, if they would be covering that off or what the status is of that, which I hope you agree with me that what started off as participatory budgeting in the classic sense became ordering from a catalog for things for the community.
Yes, Councillor Fletcher, and in addition, the financial limits were restricted. So in both situations, the original PB program, there really wasn't a dollar amount maximum that you could request. So if you requested fencing or painting or whatever, you presented that to the council as a whole and they voted. In the new program, it's not capital items at all. It's strictly items for your community. And I believe it's to a maximum of $1,000 per community. But I do want to add a comment that's really important. The original PB program with capital items was not, no insult to staff, and staff come and go, was not well managed, was not well understood, was not well implemented, and it was really a battle in our communities because tenants don't understand the nature of capital items. And so often an item would be approved, but by the time it went to get delivered in the community, pieces would be missing that were not budgeted for, which a tenant would know nothing about. So whether or not a future program considers capital budget items, and as we're talking about budgeting versus, community opportunities, is a different thing.
So I think, and I know I'm taking a bit of time at the committee for this, but you are addressing it, that the program that was to order machinery from a catalog is not a classic participatory budgeting program. It should be called something different.
I would concur with that.
You concur. So where's the program where tenants could get things for the community is the question. And, or if does management want to bring back an actual participatory budgeting better understood for capital up to, I think it's up to $50,000 capital in different communities. So I will be asking that question. I thank you for drawing that out today.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of the deputant? No? Okay, thanks, Catherine, until we get you on again. On
You can.
On the item? Sorry?
Sorry,
Yeah.
I want to speak to it.
Yep. Oh, on this item? Oh, Catherine, well, I think what we'll do is, all right. So Councillor Fletcher, we'll come back to this as the deputant has another commentary on the other briefing note. Is that correct, Catherine?
Great.
Catherine, is that correct? You have
Well, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not in charge of what Councillor Fletcher's doing, but I'd be happy to carry on.
No, yeah. So you wanted to talk about the staff access to the TCHC digital video surveillance system. So we'll deal with that, and we'll take any questions of you at that time, and then we'll go back to the beginning of the business arising items. So please begin. Is that all right?
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I want to thank the staff. I thank you, Nadia, for bringing back this briefing note, the update. I understand that tenants do not have access to view DVR footage, nor should they, and that was never my intent. As a former special constable myself, as an auxiliary police officer with Toronto Police Services, and a former police dispatcher, I am well informed around the risk of inappropriate access or use of CCTV footage. I think the disconnect on this issue is management's understanding that this decision does directly impact on tenant services delivery, because if it didn't, I wouldn't even be talking about it. As tenants are the eyes and the ears, they're the ones who bring incidents forward to their superintendents that occur after hours and on weekends, and then ultimately the superintendent determines if it warrants further follow-up. So this is a relation that's been going on for 15 years or longer between site staff and tenants, and they have confidence in their superintendent to look into these matters and to resolve them, right? So ultimately, well, this is an operations decision, and I get that. Ultimately, the board determines if such items arising, warrant further discussion. So this decision has a direct impact on tenant service delivery, as I indicated. So now what's happening is if a tenant brings an issue to site staff, they no longer have access. So from the tenant's perspective, if the landlord doesn't care because site staff can't review the cameras, then why should tenants bother bringing incidents to their attention? Installation of these multiple CCTV cameras has served the corporation and our tenants well. Site staff can address tenancy management issues directly with the households involved. And as superintendents are the agents of the landlord, it would seem prudent they have access to the necessary tools in the performance of their duties. For all of us, this makes our communities a better place to live, work, and play. That said, look, if you've got staff that are inappropriately downloading or sharing video evidence, that is absolutely a serious concern and of consequence for the corporation. Perhaps it's time to reconsider, revising the training and the policies on CCTV images, with the understanding that misuse could result in legal consequences for the corporation or disciplinary action for those that are not complying with the policy. Although it did not pan out to be a viable compromise, I do want to acknowledge Al Britton and Bob Dyer investigating the possibility of a 72-hour time-limited access to footage. I support staff in continuing to look at alternatives that would address our labor partners' concerns, which ultimately impacts their ability to serve tenants. In the long run, frankly, if superintendents do not have CCTV access beyond looking if the camera's turned on or not, this is a great disservice to tenants, and it will have a long-lasting negative impact on our communities. So, as this matter has not yet been resolved, perhaps it should continue to remain on the action item list until the working group identify a solution to address the building level concerns around restricted access while ensuring the security of personal information. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Councillor Fletcher.
Catherine, you have been a tenant for quite a long time. You've been a tenant board member, you've been a tenant representative, and during the majority of your time, the staff have had access. And how have they used that access to any camera footage? Do you have any experience with that?
Absolutely. I mean, it could be something, relatively straightforward. It could be, a dog has an accident on the lobby carpet. Well, they're going to look at the camera and see whose dog it was and address it with the tenant that they need to clean up after their pet. It could be, somebody drove into our driveway and threw some tires into our garbage bins. Well, then the tenant would be the one to tell the super if this was after hours or on weekends. And then the superintendent could identify the license plate, the vehicle, and let the safety unit know that there was illegal dumping, and they could pursue that matter. But when it came to a tenant issue of a tenant doing something inappropriate, maybe, smoking in the lobby or just some things like that, or throwing garbage about, then the super could identify the tenant and follow up. And then we stop these things from reoccurring. And that's what makes it a partnership with staff and tenants. So we make it a better place to live together.
Thank you. And that was, were there any issues that you're aware of during that time or brought to your attention that you can speak about publicly?
As a tenant, you see all kinds of things. Every tenant would have a list of stories to tell you, ridiculous things that may occur in their communities. Off the top of my head, maybe there was a fight. Maybe a tenant was, there's an incident where a tenant was throwing stones or mud at another tenant's balcony and somebody got beat up. And this was after hours. So if a tenant hadn't brought it to the attention of site staff, that wouldn't have been identified. I'm not sure the individuals chose to charge each other through Toronto Police, or they just walked away both angry at each other. But of course, brought to the superintendent's attention, he could identify the tenants and he could, I guess, get to the bottom of it and see if they wanted to pursue it further.
And the superintendent can always put that up to the acting general manager, the general manager, any footage that they would have seen for advice, consultation, direction, same up to the COO if there's anything questionable outside of somebody letting their dog poo in the wrong place, right?
Right.
Lots of fail-safes there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. All right, on the item, are there any questions of staff?
Yes, I do have some questions of staff, and I also will be moving that these items remain in the action item list, Mr. Chair, because if not, oh God, I think you've got somebody has their, that's in that room has their, now they've turned it off, thank you. So really and truly, the participatory budgeting, I just want to ask the staff, and we've gone through this before, that it became a misnomer as far as participatory budgeting actually has to do with everybody getting together, looking at projects and determining which ones are going to go forward, not purchasing things from a catalog. Could I have that corroborated, please? That's your understanding.
So through the chair to you, Councillor Fletcher, initially, the participatory budgeting program was related to capital investment in our communities. I believe when we moved towards a fully funded capital plan through the facilities management team, we moved away from the traditional participatory budgeting approach where tenants were actually participating and voting on capital projects. So you are right, it moved into more of a focus on purchasing items for their buildings and lower cost items, so that is correct.
But I'm just being clear that participatory budgeting in its form as understood everywhere in the city, the country, the planet, is not purchasing things out of catalogs.
So through the chair, that is my understanding as well.
And so this has been a misnomer since it moved from deciding on capital projects in each community to buying things out of a catalog. And have we ever said that very clearly here? Because I keep seeing reports that talk about participatory budgeting program, as was the purchase from catalogs. And I'm quite concerned about that.
So through the chair, I do believe that the title of participatory budgeting, given that it moved away from the original intent of the program, is something that we are looking into reviewing before bringing back any recommendations to the committee. So agreed that I think the title of participatory budgeting was not as accurate as the historical relevance of the title.
So just to, Mr. Chair, I've asked many times that this not be called participatory budgeting. We can call about the so-called, whatever you'd like to call it, but we look silly. This was never participatory budgeting after it changed to ordering things from a catalog.
So
It was ordering things from a catalog. So how are we going to fix that? I'm quite concerned. I keep bringing this up. And here we go again. You know, we've had a deputation about it, which was correct.
So
and
your
then
sense
there's
of
still nothing in its place for ordering from. Let's ask the city. Let's ask SDFA. Give us ask somebody. Participatory budgeting is not ordering something from a catalog.
No, it's not. So your
That's
sense
just,
of participatory budgeting is really if tenants are participating in the decisions that lead to capital improvements. Is that right?
And there may be a certain amount for that. There may be, they have to develop it. Yes, that is the classic proper definition of participatory budgeting, which was there until we moved to this new model.
So the CEO is
misnamed.
So the CEO is acknowledging this, and we probably need a new name for this budgeting action. And you're moving a motion to have this. Before you move your motion, I'd like to ask a question of staff on this, if you don't mind. Okay?
No, I don't mind, but I just want to say, I want it acknowledged that this is incorrect.
I think it's acknowledged.
Just do.
It's acknowledged.
No, it's never, I keep getting it back, Mr. Chair. Every time I look at these things, it talks about PB. And that was we've been on this track for over 2 years and remaining, what
Right.
was misnamed.
Okay,
I don't care
Councillor
how we
Fletcher.
fix it.
Right. Okay. So, my question to staff is: this indicates that it's been removed and to be addressed as part of a future report regarding what is heretofore known as participatory budgeting. And so, what can someone explain to me the staff plan in terms of when you're going to come back and in what form?
So I can speak through the chair to the actual recommendation in the briefing note, and that is that we would continue as part of the agenda review for these meetings to review with the committee chair, with yourself, the timeline through which we would bring back a report that would address the manner in which we would propose to refresh the program that was previously known as the participatory budgeting program. The recommendation in the briefing note is simply to remove the item from the action item list for the time being. It's not making any recommendation as to the substance of the program or its name. It's simply saying what we propose in order to manage the action item list going forward is to deal with these kind of matters where there's an event that has to occur before we know when the action item will be reported back on, to deal with it through the process that I've described. Ongoing conversations with the committee chair to flag this as an ongoing matter so that we don't lose sight of it, but bring it back when that event in the future is actually going to occur so that we can attach a real timeline to the reporting back and it doesn't sit on the action item list with an undefined return date.
And is there, will staff undertake to rename this the, local spending initiative or this local spending improvements or programs or something of that nature?
Through the chair, that is the plan. So the review was to be conducted in 2022. Many of the staff that were implicated in the review were seconded to support the Swansea response, and so we weren't able to complete the review at that time, and so the plan is to do that in 2023 with recommendations coming to this committee and ultimately the board moving into 2024. So absolutely, and that includes a title change. Any reference to participatory budgeting is referring to the historical program that might have been misnamed, but I think moving forward, I can work with Dara to ensure that the appropriate title is reflected for this item.
Okay, anything further from committee members?
Yes, yes.
Councillor
I'd like
Fletcher?
I'm not prepared to have this dropped. It's been here for 2 years. I'm not prepared to have it dropped. I'm going to move to maintain this, but I would like a little briefing note about participatory budgeting, ordering from a catalog, and what your plans are, what the options are going to be. Because I'm sorry, I don't usually get upset, but this one, as you know, is unfortunate. And I don't want to lose it, Mr. Chair. So again, let's fix it. Let's fix it formally in our minutes and in our agenda and have some idea of the timeline that this will come back.
Okay, so can staff take it as an undertaking to come back at the next meeting with a briefing note to advise the committee on the direction they'd like to move forward on this, right? Okay.
And an understanding of what participatory budgeting, but I'm moving a motion not to remove this. I'm moving a motion not to remove either of these at the moment, Mr. Chair. Not satisfied yet.
So what's the motion? The motion is that can the motion be that staff come back to the next meeting with a clear plan forward for what is known as participatory budgeting and what is known as the other form of spending for local initiatives?
Yes, that's fine, but the real ask today is not to take these off of the business arising. My motion is leave them on the business arising, and that goes for the cameras as well, because I'm not satisfied with that either, based on Ms. Wilkinson's deputation. I don't think we're trying hard enough.
Okay, so Councillor Fletcher has moved a motion to have these items remain on the action item list. And I see nods from the other committee members, so that's all in favor. And that motion is passed. And then that's all we need to do on this item. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Right, so now we move on to item number 6, the Office of the Commissioner of Housing Equity biannual update. And we're looking for Melanie Martin. There she is.
Good morning.
Good morning, Melanie. All right, so Melanie, if you would like to proceed with your update, please.
Yes, thank you. So through the chair, I am pleased to present the OACH biannual report. This report includes the OACH outcomes for the period of July 1st to December 31st, 2022. It also includes an analysis of the data that was collected in all of 2022 from the family portfolio, which can be found in Appendix 2. Of note, at the last TSC meeting, I presented the results of the OACH's work in our 2022 work plan, and for that reason, I will focus my presentation today on the analysis of the family portfolio. As you know, on January 1st, 2022, the OACH's mandate expanded to include all TCHC tenants in arrears of rent, and the referral rate to the OACH increased by 80%. This resulted in a backlog of files waiting to be referred to the OACH. This had an impact on arrears across the regions and on OACH resources, as there were more files that could be completed within the 45-day timeline outlined in the OACH terms of reference. Sorry, I got a cold. We operated for 1 year under this mandate and committed to gather data and provide an analysis of what we found. In 2022, the OACH received 574 stage 1 referrals from the family portfolio, and 75 of these were sent back to TCHC for a variety of reasons. The OACH issued 462 reports and recommendations, and the EROs successfully engaged with 412 of those tenants and resolved the arrears of rent in 77% of those cases. We found that these resolutions were straightforward, with 63% being managed through local repayment agreements, 24% being paid by the tenant and or their family, and 18% through the Housing Stabilization Fund. Historically, the OACH's specialized service is centered around supporting tenants with vulnerabilities, which has included referrals to community agencies for additional or wraparound support for the sake of maintaining a tenancy in the longer term. With respect to the files which were received from the family portfolio in 2022, these referrals were not warranted in many instances. Only 18% of cases required additional support to maintain a successful tenancy, with the most common intervention being calling the tenant's bank to set up recurring payments or to correct an issue with the tenant's bank account. And less than 1% or 4 files was a community-based resource needed. The OACH recommended that TCHC proceed with filing an L1 application to the Landlord and Tenant Board in 31% or 144 cases. Of those 144 cases, the EROs were able to make direct contact with the tenant in 65% of the cases. However, they were still not successful at resolving the arrears of rent. In the instances where the ERO engaged with the tenant but still did not recommend that recommended that TCHC proceed with filing the L1 application, the most common reason in 47% of cases was because the tenant engaged with the ERO and then disengaged, and in 23% of cases refused the services of OACH and or requested that the matter be referred to the LTB. We looked further into the 94 cases where the L1 application was recommended after the ERO made contact with the tenant and found that 20% of the tenants paid off the arrears, 15% reached a mediated agreement at the LTB, and TCHC only obtained an order to evict in 6% of all cases. As a result of the analysis of the family portfolio, the following conclusions were drawn. So first, that fewer tenants from the family portfolio engaged with the EROs, that the resolutions were straightforward and the result of a positive interaction with the tenant leading to a repayment agreement, that only 18% of cases required a referral to an outside agency for support, and that 27% of all files from the family portfolio included a family member who was on Ontario Works. Because of this, the OACH suggested that the following changes be made to support TCHC staff to resolve cases without the need for an OACH referral. First, the use of the Stage 1 checklist as a screening tool. So the checklist, developed in collaboration with TCHC, will ensure that only those files which are appropriate for an OACH intervention are referred to the OACH. Second, coaching, mentoring, and training of TCHC frontline staff. Third, assigning the EROs to specific regions in order to foster positive relationships between TSCs and EROs, and to ensure EROs are regionally specific subject matter experts with a connection to the communities they are working in. And lastly, that the OACH will continue to participate in the Kaizen review of the arrears collection process. So this work is already underway, with the N4 checklist going live on February 13th, and 12 training sessions have already been completed in the first quarter of this year, with 150 staff attending. So there has been discussion between OACH and Toronto Housing with respect to managing the expanded mandate of OACH to review arrears files from the family portfolio. And we're hoping that these process changes will curb the flow of referrals to the OACH in a natural way. So our next step is to evaluate the effectiveness of these changes, and the OACH is hopeful that these measures will have a positive result for both TCHC and tenants. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Melanie. Questions of the commissioner from committee members?
I'd like to know the numbers, not the percentages, please. It's kind of hard to follow in this report.
Okay. So
The end, 1 year, this is your by yearly. How many folks did you deal with? And how many of them were kind of slipped through the cracks that you're dealing with that should have been dealt with earlier by the TCHC staff?
Also, thank you through the chair. So we received 464 referrals from TCHC. And however, we issued in total for last year 353 reports. So we were able to resolve 353 cases of last year.
So I'll just ask TCHC. So that means there was 111 that were not resolvable.
No, so what it means is they were referred to the OACH, Councillor Fletcher, but what happened is that we have 45 days to report out. So there's still a pocket of files from our the referrals, the 464 that will still need to be resolved as of January, February of this year. So we'll report out to them on our next biannual, yes.
And of the 353, how many of those should have been resolved earlier? Did you do all of those, or did you send them back to be resolved?
No, so we resolved all of those with the OACH. So it wasn't until, well, this year that we've really identified that we need to stop accepting all referrals and sending some back to TCHC. So we'll be able to better provide you with numbers in our next biannual report of what's come to us and what was should have been resolved by the front.
So can you not look at that and tell me how many should have been sent back? Must have done that work already.
Well, we did it for the sorry, I apologize. We did it for the family portfolio. So if you look at the back.
Just tell me the page number.
Yes,
please. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just looking myself. So if you look at page 14.
Is that your report or the numbers?
Oh, sorry, in the board, it's page 38. I apologize.
Thank you. Yep.
So this chart outlines the OACH resolutions. So how many cases we resolved by different means. So you can see there's 77 resolved by the tenant and their family, Ontario Works, Housing Stabilization Fund, or a local repayment agreement. What we were suggesting, or what the new checklist is suggesting, and what we're trying to do now is shift that any of the resolutions that had a local repayment agreement, Housing Stabilization Fund, that those be sent back to the to TCHC to try to resolve before coming to OACH.
So, but the TCHC sent them to you?
Yes.
So you'd be sending them back, and what are the numbers there? 63 and 18.
Mm-hmm. That's 63%.
That's
so there would be
81%. Oh. No, these are, your percentages don't add up. Oh, it's of 396.
It's because
I'm just interested in the numbers. Is the total number 396 people? So you've got 353 over here.
Yeah, so what this is these are different resolutions that we had, and sometimes a tenant has multiple resolutions, but I think what we're looking at is, what we're finding is that there's probably about 60% of the files that we're trying now to push back. I would say it's around 60% if I had to guess off the top of my head. I can get you the exact numbers that we're hoping we can push back over to TCHC to try to resolve on the front line from the family portfolio.
And so I'm just asking through you, Mr. Chair, so none of these were sent back. So you're considering the caseload, so 60% to go back. And I think I want to view this, and this technically should go to the board, Mr. Chair. It's the OACH actually reports to the board, not the committee, unless we change something. Do we change something, John?
Sorry, what's the question about the report going to the board?
Did we change? This is a board officer.
Correct.
Not a committee officer.
Right.
So I'm assuming this report will be at the board.
This report will go to the board, correct, Darren? Right.
Thank you. And then when we're there, I'll just want to understand, staffing wise, we have a lot of staff, and we're hearing that 60% of these should be resolved internally before they go to the OACH. So that's quite concerning to me. I would assume it's concerning to the rest of the board and to management. So when this comes there, I'll be wanting to hear what the plan is to ensure that these aren't being escalated to the OACH, and what the resourcing plan is for these for arrears. And note that there's only 178,000 of it that was paid back directly, and 833,000 or so is being paid off over time. So there's repayment agreements, but there are repayment agreements. Yeah, and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Do any other committee members have questions? Uba? No? All right, I have a couple of questions. Melanie, on page 6 of the report, or page 30, so in the second item in the table, make direct contact with the tenant in the first month of arrears. The trend, and maybe this should be the question for staff, but I'm gonna ask you, is this where so the trend seems to be getting worse on a percentage basis of the fact that we're not making early enough contact. Is that where you identify that 60% of the cases could be resolved, or could be resolved? Is that the number you're looking at, or is there something else you're looking at? But maybe you could speak to this trend.
Thank you. So through the chair, so what this means is that the arrears collection process requires that a direct contact attempt be made in the first month of arrears. And so this stat is finding that that is not occurring. So it's either it's happening at a later time. I think I have.
So then I'll follow up, and just the question is to staff. I guess the question to staff is, why is this occurring?
So through the chair, we're finding a variety of issues that are contributing to this, one of which is our TSCs are also currently allocated to hub locations. And so we were attempting to ensure that there was coverage in the physical space of the hub versus going door to door. We're working with OACH and the local teams to ensure that staff are heading to units where we're not able to contact the tenant on the phone. And so we're really starting to push for more door-to-door contact and communication with tenants outside of calling from the hub or from the staff's phone number. So that is something that we're working on leading into this year. So that's something that you'll see hopefully start to change.
Okay, because I mean, obviously we don't want to sacrifice having better connections with tenants through the hubs at the expense of not having them, having us collect the rent.
Through the chair, agreed. I think we need to do a few things differently. And so I know that the team has been working on some best practices to ensure that our staff are connecting directly to tenants and we're not escalating files to OACH that can be handled locally. I will comment that our current arrears collection process does require us to send files over to OACH in a particular time period. And that is something that we're reviewing to actually align with more ability for the local team to actually action and resolve files locally.
Thanks. Thank you. Melanie, you mentioned that the EROs are now going to be geographically aligned. So I gather that was not the case previously. And how do you ensure that because perhaps some areas have, how do you ensure that the workloads are still equitably distributed throughout your EROs?
So thank you through the chair. So right now, historically the EROs haven't been assigned geographically for that reason. So because we could never kind of control the flow of referrals to the OACH, we didn't know whether we were going to get a bunch from the west, east, or central. With the new process that's in place, we get the same amount of referrals each week from each region, so it's easier to assign them specifically geographically. And what will happen is let's say, should we start getting a large amount of volume from one area, we may have to change their portfolio slightly, but we're really trying to keep people, the EROs, regionally specific, so that they can start to build relationships with the TSCs and be there as a support for them in the hubs when they're there and available through these case conferencing. So we thought we would try this out, given we've never done it before at OACH, to see if it's more effective.
Okay, thank you. And so you've now been in the big job for, what, 7, 8 weeks? Is that about right?
Yes.
And do you have any sort of off-the-cuff commentary as to how things are going and if you've had any surprises?
Thank you, through the chair. I think coming back from being away on maternity leave, I came back to a different OACH. So I do think just learning to navigate and manage the new expanded mandate has been interesting, but it's actually really exciting work, and it's exciting working with Nadia and her team, because I think there's some great changes that we can make and hopefully start building capacity of frontline staff. So I'm excited for the shift I feel the office has started to take, and Summer started that under her leadership last year, and just seeing these new projects come into play and starting to evaluate them as we roll them out.
That's great. And so I just have, we have a deputation that I mistakenly forgot to bring forward, which I'll do in just a moment. And then we'll take questions of the deputy, of course. But I have one question of staff before we get to that. And it's a question I've asked in the past. So we have in the report on page 4, it indicates, which is page 28 of our agenda, it indicates that we have $883,000 in brokered repayment agreements between TCHC and tenants. And I asked Melanie the other day, and the OACH doesn't track this, and I'm just wondering how staff tracks this. So of that, because I think it should, if it's not being tracked, it should be tracked to know at any point in time, you know, is it realistic for us to expect that these repayments will be made? Are 50% repaid? I mean, how do we, just like to know how we track that. Because obviously, if they've gone to the work of brokering repayment, we want to know if in fact that's worked out.
So through the chair, can you just clarify the question, how we track whether they're successfully paying them back, or how we track whether they actually have a repayment agreement?
No, so we know they have repayment agreements because that's what the OACH is reporting. And the question is, are those repayment agreements, in the end, do they turn out to be successful? Do we track that?
So through the chair, we do track that. We have varying success with repayment agreements. We do have breaches more often. I don't have the exact number, but it is a fairly high number, and we work with the tenant to actually try to get back on track with their repayment agreements. To clarify, not all repayment agreements would go through OACH. So a tenant might be in arrears and they work with the local team to establish a repayment agreement and get back on track, and so those wouldn't necessarily be referred over to OACH. So the challenge would be, if we're trying to meet the timeline, we're not able to actually secure a local repayment agreement, and those are the ones that typically go through to the OACH team. But we do track that, and we do have information in terms of whether they're breached or not, and following up with the teams locally and the tenants.
And so just to follow up, Jag, I guess this would be for you. So is there a line item in the budget that's, you know, and there must be for like these debts that are written off?
Through the chair, I'd have to get back to you on whether, and with the specifics of what's reflected in the budget. I think there are limited occasions in which we write arrears off. And if you would allow me the flexibility, I can go do that research and come back with that information.
Great, thank you. If there are no other questions of staff right now from committee members, we'll go to the deputant, and then after the deputant speaks, we'll have questions of the deputant, and then we'll wrap up the item. Thank you, Melanie. And just hang in there because there may be further questions. And the deputant? Catherine?
Yeah.
Catherine, my apologies for not recognizing you at the outset of the item. But you still have your moment.
Okay, Okay, I'm just trying to figure out how to close something on my computer there. Oh, no, cancel. I was trying to figure out how to put my video back on. Is my video on?
No, it's not.
Oh, that's not good. Yeah. And I don't know how to close the screen I'm in.
I mean, it's okay. We can hear you, Catherine, if you want to proceed, and then we'll see if members have questions of you.
Okay, I don't know if staff can call my video up. They turned me off, so now I'm trying to turn me back on and I can't. So I think they control that.
They say that they cannot. So just proceed with the deputation, please.
Okay. All right. Just to be fair, I like seeing my audience I'm talking to as well. Okay, I'm going to forgive you for, acknowledging the deputation first. Okay, so thank you very much for that, Melanie. I know that you're making great strides. You and Natty are working together, and I really can see some positive improvement from that relationship. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that kind of stuck out for me. As we know, the board approved revisions to the terms of reference effective January 1st of last year to expand the jurisdiction. The OAT should be working not just with seniors and vulnerable tenants, so to that of working with all tenants living in Toronto community housing. And from my perspective, that was a great day for tenants who may be struggling in the family portfolio. So on page 3, we talk about the arrears at time of referral to the OAT. And I note that the arrears at time of referral, as Melanie spoke to, that they're higher than they were in the previous period, in part as a result of those imposed time limits on the number of referrals they could handle at one time. The eviction prevention policy states that Toronto Community Housing will intervene early when rent payment is late to help prevent tenants from falling further into arrears. And as per the revised terms of reference, all tenants now have the right to the services of OAT, who is required to resolve these files within 45 days. We also know that the number of referrals has been reduced. The arrears files sit in what's known as the arrears pipeline. So they're waiting for OAT services. And according to the chart, there seems to be a trend where the arrears have almost doubled during that timeline since Toronto Community Housing gave the tenant a notice to end their tenancy early due to arrears. There's no indication of the average wait time. These files were there. Previously, the requirement was to forward them within 60 days. So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment. Are the increased arrears that accumulated during this time the fault of the tenant or the corporation for failing to comply with their eviction prevention policy, which reads to intervene early to prevent tenants from falling into further arrears? On page 11 of 18, it talks about how OACH and TCH are working to develop strategies so that more files can be resolved locally and reduce the referrals to OACH. And on page 17 of this report, it says, due to the finding, OACH has suggested the following changes, of which the implementation has begun. So there's points A, B, C, and I'm specifically referring to C. All files where tenants are in receipt of social assistance be resolved through the regions with the assistance of OW, ODSP caseworkers, and the Housing Stabilization Fund. From an administrative perspective, this strategy is well intended and absolutely promotes more timely resolution of arrears at the local level. However, does this strategy change the intent of the board-approved OACH terms of reference, which was to provide services to all tenants? It does not say to provide services to all tenants except recipients of OW and ODSP. So we need to step back and carefully consider the optics to this decision. Management may call it strategic, tenants may call it something else entirely. The Ontario Human Rights Code protects tenants against discrimination based on receipt of public assistance. So we need to ask ourselves, are we discriminating against tenants by denying them access to OACH services simply because they are recipients of OW or ODSP. Wherever this lands, it's important to communicate it out publicly. Tenants, as the recipients of these services, need to know how Toronto Community Housing will work with them to provide assistance in accordance with the eviction prevention policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson. Any questions of the deputant? Okay, no. Councillor Fletcher, you look like you might have a question. No?
No, I was going to, I think that was a very important point that was raised, and I think that'd be good to have the answer from staff. Or from the
Can
others,
I maybe
actually.
clarify something about the OW, ODS, like the OW piece? May I provide a clarification?
Yep, please go ahead.
So through the chair, thank you, Catherine, for the deputation. I appreciate it. I just wanted to clarify that what we're trying to do right now with it's not saying that people on OW or ODSP can never come to OACH. What the requirement is right now is that we see that TCHC has made an attempt to resolve it at the front line before it comes to OACH. So should they not be able to resolve it at in the regions, then they can still refer that case to OACH, and OACH will review it and provide support. So that it's not that to say that it won't come to OACH. It's just saying we're trying to build the capacity for frontline staff to do it at TCHC first, and then it would come to OACH.
Thank you for that answer. Any further questions of the Commissioner of Housing Equity? Okay, seeing none, I need a motion to receive the report, please. Okay, moved by Mohammed. All in favor? Great, thank you. Next item is the Chief Operating Officer's report. And Nadia, did you want to make an introduction or high-level review, please?
So thank you, Chair Campbell. Drawing attention to specifically our vacancy and arrears rates. So our vacancy rate in January 2023 was 1.67%, down from 1.7% in December of 2022. And I'm pleased to report that that is the lowest vacancy rate we have had at any point in over 4 years. This represented 717 rentable vacant units, which was 13 fewer than December. In terms of actions we are taking on vacancy management, we continue to conduct targeted vacancy reviews at the local hub level. We are implementing the vacancy reduction action plan that TCHC develops in partnership with the service manager and Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation. As I mentioned, TCHC achieved its target vacancy rate of 2% or sub 2% in November of 2022, ahead of the December schedule, and we're aiming to sustain this rate into 2023. Some of our key objectives this year include continuing to focus on expediting units through our unit turnover process and through Rent Cafe, and exploring all efficiencies to get units tenanted as quickly as possible. Moving on to arrears, total arrears were $27.6 million in January 2023. The majority of these arrears, $25 million, were from rent and parking arrears, which will be further explained as I continue. As mentioned, rent and parking arrears in January 2023 were $25 million, an increase of approximately $800,000 from December 2022. We would like to point out that the arrears total will continue to grow year over year, but we are committed to having strategies in place to slow this growth. After some analysis of TCHC's increase in rent and parking arrears between December and January, it was identified that most of these arrears came from new arrears. This means that tenants were not in arrears beforehand. This is something that we also saw at December 2021 into January 2022. We have engaged other social housing providers, and they have also identified similar trends in arrears. These increases are concerning and will be a focus of our 2023 efforts in managing the tenancy management pillar. Staff are doing a deep dive to better understand the arrears increase, and we continue to pilot different approaches to address them over the regions. We have also undertaken a Lean Six Sigma review of our arrears collection process and have been able to identify gaps and inefficiencies in our current approach. We are currently concluding supplemental Kaizen sessions to do a deeper dive into some of the areas of opportunity. The findings and feedback will help inform an updated arrears collection process in the upcoming months. Additionally, TCHC has developed an arrears task force to target priority buildings and accounts to reduce arrears, and as of March 1st, 2023, we have lifted the eviction moratorium for tenants with arrears to pre-pandemic thresholds, allowing us to work with tenants sooner through LTB escalations to develop court-directed repayment plans and mediated agreements. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions of staff?
Yeah, there are a number of commercial repayment plans, I guess, for these arrears, separate parts. So the commercial ones don't go to the OACH, do they? Those are, do they? I don't know.
So through the chair, to clarify, you mean repayment agreements in commercial units, Councillor Fletcher?
Correct. Basically through COVID, where all of our, I don't know how many commercial units there are and commercial arrears, et cetera, and tenancies that are faulting or failing in that sense.
So through the chair, that does not.
That we never talk about.
Yeah, so through the chair, that does not go through OACH currently, and it's actually managed under our facilities management team, under Alan Murray's team. So not necessarily through operations proper.
And what is is Alan here to answer some arrears issues there with commercial? Or do we want to just have that broken out next time? I'm happy to do it like that too.
So through the chair, I can work with Alan to ensure that we break that out next time and we're able to answer any questions about that specifically.
That would be good. Number of commercial leases, number of defaults, what happened during COVID, did you apply for the COVID grants, et cetera, those things. That'd be great. Thank you. Thanks, Nadia.
Any further questions of staff on this item? I have a question. We put parking and rent together. Why do we do that? And I mean, is it generally the case that somebody that's arrears on their parking is also in arrears on their rent, or vice versa?
So through the chair, to answer your second question, it isn't always the case. There's some situations where we have tenants that might be 2 months behind on their rental charges, but 3 months behind on their parking charges. It depends on the individual situation. Rent and parking are coupled together because they're typically on current tenancies, and that's what operations manages. So in terms of the COO's report, we speak to the area of work where we could actually implement changes and we have jurisdiction over, so that's why it's been coupled. I know at the last TSC there was some conversation around having a separate arrears parking strategy, and that's something that I've asked the team to look into. So I don't know if we'll be ready for the next TSC, but certainly a future one where we can speak to a strategy outside of rent arrears.
So when somebody's, do all tenants pay for parking?
No.
Where do they pay for parking?
So through the chair, it depends on the building. We do have some locations, even in townhouse communities, where tenants are required to pay for their parking access. We also have some buildings, particularly in the downtown core, where we don't, parking's at a premium, and tenants are also expected to pay for parking outside of their rental agreement. So it varies community to community.
And so in a downtown location, would these, how much would they be paying a day or a month or a week? How much would they be paying?
So through the chair, I will ask Senior Director Richard Groch if he can speak to this item.
Sorry, I would investigate that further. Sorry, through the chair, I'd have to investigate that further. I believe it's dependent on the geographic location. Downtown costs associated to parking would be significantly greater than that on the outskirts of the downtown core, but it's set based on the geographic location.
Has Toronto Community Housing ever given are these gated? Are these gated parking garage? Are these gated underground parking garage or surface parking?
dependent on our location. We have both, actually. We do have outdoor gated parking spots, and the mass majority are underground in downtown.
And does the general public use these on occasion, these parking garages?
We do have commercial parking at some locations. Those are typically locations where there's surface parking.
And is that commercial parking done by Green P or?
It would be in partnership through our CSU and the Toronto Parking Authority, yes.
Okay, so I think it would be helpful to know the extent of, there's two things that I would like to see, is to know the extent of the parking arrears, and then total parking revenues for the corporation. It seems that we need some kind of a strategy so that, either we're, because there's a little bit of an inequality if somebody's, perhaps they're out at Willow Ridge and they don't pay for parking, and they're downtown and they're paying for parking, and I think it'd be helpful to know a little bit more if we could do that in a future meeting.
So through the chair, absolutely. Myself and the team can start working on that report and bring it back.
Any comments from our tenants on parking? No? Uba, do you park?
Yeah, I park. Yeah, I have a parking spot, but sometime I see in the parking my spot, other people parking. So if I call to the housing, the security, and you wait and no real response I am getting. So I want that there should be parking enforced team, TCHC, not under the security like a CSU. So then they can differentiate their workload and how they will work, right? If tenant have a problem in the parking area, so they call, there will be a number that only they do work for the parking, not for the security purpose. I am getting that problem.
Okay, thank you. And Mohammed, you pay your...
I am paying $50 per month.
So through the chair, if I can comment on that, we do have a dedicated parking enforcement team. They do work under CSU. So I know that we don't necessarily have the resources to patrol every community on a consistent basis, but we typically go where there are requests, and we can send specific officers to particular regions if there's concerns flagged. So I don't know, Al, our Senior Director of the Community Safety Unit, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yes, good morning, Chair Campbell. Through the chair, CSU does assign as stated. We do have a complaints process where we identify specific areas. Our special constables in the front line are able to enforce. They also have their MLEO status, which is municipal licensing enforcement status, as well as the Toronto Police and city bylaw can enforce on our property as well. So there is a broad spectrum of enforcement initiatives on our property, and we do respond on a case-by-case basis through calls for service as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions on this item, we'll move to item...
I just have a quick comment.
Yes,
John.
please. Yes, please, Uba.
So, some people, some tenants complain about not having enough parking, because what happened is some family owes 2 or 3 cars, and I don't know if it's possible to number, and each tenant should be given maybe a number, and then if someone has second car, then they can get their second parking when everyone else get their first parking. So that's something I always notice. There's always shortage of parking. The other question that I have is, Nadia, great work. I'm so happy to see that we have less vacancy now and we're filling those. I was just curious, are you filling those units through an rent cafe or internal transfer, or people are now agreeing to take bachelors? Because I think few months back, I heard a lot of people were refusing to take bachelors, and that's why we had a lot of bachelors, sitting around while we have a lot of homeless people. So just if you can speak to that. Thank you.
So through the chair, thank you for the question, Director Farah. In terms of uptake, almost all of the units that are moving through the vacancy process are going through the centralized waiting list and Rent Cafe, including our bachelor units. I think the lowest bid, so we have different folks from the centralized waiting list bidding on units. I believe the lowest we typically get is around 16 bids for a bachelor unit. So we haven't seen, they're less popular potentially than a one-bedroom in terms of the number of bids, but there's significant interest, and we're also seeing our bachelor units move through the vacancy process. So we're having a lot of success with the Rent Cafe process and working with the city, and we want to continue to do that work.
Uba, what was your parking question? Could you say that again?
I was wondering if, and thank you for your answer, and Nadia. My question was, is it possible to give people numbers? So if somebody have 2-3 cars and they park your number, then you can call the security to remove that car. So it's just to be fair, because it's not fair for one family to have 2-3 cars and fill the parking while someone is struggling to park their only one car, you know? So is it possible to number the parking? That was my question.
So through the chair, I think that's a fantastic idea. I believe there's different historical approaches we've taken to assigning parking spaces. So let me take that away and bring it back with sort of that parking strategy. And if there isn't a lens of equity currently being applied, I think that's a great idea and suggestion that my team can work on. So thank you.
Thank you. Mohammed?
So about Uber, I know that Toronto Housing, when they allocate you parking, they give you the number which location you will park your car. But I found myself, the tenant, they don't care. They park here, there, whatever they want. And Uber said that some people, they have 2-3 car, right? And sometimes myself, I could not park my car proper place. And I raised the issue that some parking area we need CCTV camera, because I got myself like affected. So 3 times I got and damaged my car, and I have to pay from my pocket. So I raised already this issue. And the Toronto police, they could not find the answer. Nobody give you the real answer, but I have to pay more from my pocket. So there should be in the parking spot, I don't know how many places they have a camera to identify. Because police, I challenge the police and they say, you know, you have to bring me the who suspect, right? So how can I charge a person? I cannot charge whole area, right? So we need the TCHC will bring some cameras in the parking area. Maybe it is expensive, but it will, I don't know, but my suggestion, I am thinking, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, just not to, bang this drum about parking, but do we issue, do people get tickets if they're parked illegally?
So through the chair, there are tickets issued through the parking enforcement team. Director Britton, I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Yes, yes, Chair Campbell. There are parking tickets that are issued for certain offenses, and obviously illegal parking would be one of them, fire routes and et cetera would be others. And they can be issued by our parking enforcement unit, by Toronto police officers, by our special constables, and by City of Toronto parking enforcement officers.
I'm thinking in terms of a case where there's an underground parking, and as Uba pointed out, somebody's been allocated only one parking spot, but they have friends coming in, or they have other family members parking, in that dedicated tenant parking space. Do we know which vehicles are allowed to be there and which vehicles are not allowed to be there? And then for the ones that are not allowed to be there, do we ticket them?
Yes, we do know which vehicles should be in certain locations. Again, the information stored in the computer systems. Our parking enforcement staff as well have the ability to tow vehicles if they meet a certain criteria, and obviously being parked in somebody else's spot and certain attempts being made by the people to contact the registered owner is the first attempt, and once those attempts have failed, then they can be towed appropriately.
Mohammed's going to call you when his space is occupied to get the car towed, right? Okay, that's what's going to happen. I can see that happening. Okay, we're going to move on to item 10B, the tenant complaints update. Do any committee members have any questions on that? Sorry?
Just a question, Mr. Chair. Did you want to deal with motions in relation to these at the end of all of them?
I think we'll just do, it's a motion to receive all the reports at the end. So I'll just take this, we'll go to the tenants complaints update, tenant engagement refresh, which is 10B is the tenant complaints. And if there are any questions there, go ahead, a question. Okay, no questions there, then we'll move on to the tenant engagement refresh update, which is 10C. And while I let people get acclimatized to this item, which is found on page 111, I have a question for staff, or Councillor Fletcher, or any of the other members. Do you have a question of this particular item just yet?
So Chair Campbell, I do have a presentation, but I'm happy to go directly to questions if that's the will of the committee.
How long is the presentation? Is it like an hour or 8 minutes? Okay, we'll take the presentation. That's fine.
So thank you, Chair Campbell. We're going to move into the presentation. The presentation essentially walks us through an overview of the report, and then I'm happy to take any questions at the end. So I thought it was important to highlight some significant updates and data in the latest tenant engagement system report, and I'm pleased to be able to present to the committee today. The report includes updates on a review of the tenant engagement leadership list, the outcome of the end-of-year regional forums, which took place in November and December of last year, and the Tenant Advisory Committee updates and next steps. As of May 2022, the reported number of tenant leaders was 1,486. In February, we completed a review of the list of leaders. At the end of the review, we can now confirm that there are 1,084 tenants currently participating in the tenant engagement system. The previous count of 1,486 comprised of tenant leaders in both TCHC family buildings and the seniors housing unit. Sorry, if you can just keep it on the slide, I'll give you a cue when we're moving on to the next slide. Apologies, so we can go back to page 153. We also found 126 leadership positions that were duplicates. This is because in communities that chose the building and townhouse committee model, a tenant can hold two positions, first as a building committee member and a representative. And as a representative in error, some of these individuals were double counted. So as of January 2023, 17 tenants resigned from their positions as community representatives or building committee members for various reasons, including health concerns and change in residency, among others. Next slide. So we can move on, Sonia. This slide outlines the breakdown of tenant leaders across the three regions. It shows that the East region has approximately 39% of the total number, West has 31%, and Central makes up the rest of the 29%. It's important to note that compared to the 200 tenant reps that were in place in the former tenant engagement system, we have successfully increased the total number of tenant leaders actively participating in the system. However, our goal remains to translate the increase in the total number of tenants participating to better tenant experiences and opportunities for tenants. Next slide. In November and December 2022, we organized 3 end-of-year forums for the East, West, and Central regions. 293 tenant leaders, including community reps and building committee members, attended the forums, and 24 community partners participated as vendors. All 3 forums included a panel discussion moderated by myself and included 4 panelists, including each region's general manager. After the panel session, tenants could ask the panelists questions. There were many issues of concerns raised, and all of the questions and issues raised from the forums have been documented, and regional staff have followed up on what we heard. We were also able to receive input from RPATH on accessibility at the forums. Though all venues advised they were accessible, RPATH Chair Kathy Birch was able to attend all 3 forums and provide feedback and identify gaps. RPATH has since been working with staff to ensure future events and venues are better positioned to serve as TCHC tenants with varying accessibility needs. We would like to acknowledge RPATH and their ongoing commitment to better service for all tenants. Next slide, please. In addition to the panels, tenants also completed surveys to provide feedback on the tenant engagement system and its implementation within their communities. The results from the survey show that 18% of respondents were satisfied with the tenant engagement system, and about 56% were dissatisfied. Likewise, 25% of respondents were satisfied with the process of decision-making at the community level, and 54% were dissatisfied. Further survey results were also included in the report. These numbers are indeed disappointing, but give us a clear mandate for change. Given the low level of satisfaction expressed by tenant leaders and ongoing feedback from other stakeholders, we've started the process of reviewing the system and developing recommendations to address issues that may have resulted in tenants' dissatisfaction. We want to thank all of our tenant leaders and community partners for their feedback and commitment to this work as we continue the process to implement the necessary changes to the system. Next slide, please. As part of the effort to rethink the tenant engagement system, TCHC established a tenant advisory group to work closely with staff on reviewing the recommended system changes. In September last year, we launched an open call for tenants to join the Tenant Advisory Committee. Print and digital communication materials such as posters and email notices were distributed across TCHC communities. In total, 29 tenants from across the 3 regions applied to join the Tenant Advisory Committee. 15 tenants were then vetted through a local process and selected to join. On December 14th, 2022, City Council adopted a member motion which directed the Deputy City Manager of Community and Social Services to have city staff, through the Tenants First initiative, review the proposal for a new Tenant Advisory Committee. Council directed staff to report back on the review and recommendations to the February 28th, 2023 meeting of the Planning and Housing Committee. At the February 28th meeting, the city presented 4 recommendations. The Tenant Advisory Committee terms of reference to be developed with the extended TAC membership, as well as TCHC and city staff. TCHC and the city jointly conduct additional outreach for TAC expansion. TCHC board director be invited to join the TAC, and TAC to be co-chaired by TCHC CEO and Deputy City Manager of the Community and Social Services Division. These recommendations are subject to final council direction this week, but we've begun to put steps in place to immediately act on the recommendations upon approval. Next slide, please. In response to the city's recommendation, we have developed the following actionable items as next steps. We will work with the city and the newly expanded TAC to co-develop the terms of reference. We will work alongside city staff to establish specific outreach methods and criteria to proceed with the recruitment for the expanded TAC. Pending council direction, recruitment for the TAC will begin in Q2 of 2023. We are also recommending that a tenant director be invited to join the TAC, followed by a formal appointment by the board. I think we discussed that. Lastly, we will work with the city to implement the joint chairing of the committee, specifically through the recommended chairs of Deputy City Manager and our CEO, JAG. In conclusion, we acknowledge that there is significant room for improvement in the current system and its implementation. We look forward to enhancing and expanding the TAC to increase representation, accountability, and credibility. We have also hired a new staff who's currently working with TCHC staff and conducting research. He will soon begin consultations with tenants and external stakeholders to complete a formal review of the system and make suggested changes. We hope to come back to TSC and the board in Q4 of 2023 to speak to those recommendations. I am happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Nadia. Questions of staff? Any comments from our tenant directors? Mohammed?
I have a question, like, if I want to join in the advisory committee meeting, you said that how I can go there and in the meeting I can join and discuss with the tenant advisory committee?
So through the chair, you meaning a random tenant or yourself as a
No, like,
tenant
you
director,
said
just to
there
clarify.
is a opportunity for, as a tenant director, I can join the meeting, right? In the advisory committee in the local area. So how can I go and join? I can discuss, and if I get anything, I can bring to the board that the tenant want this kind of changes, they want this.
So through the chair, the Tenant Advisory Committee expansion, we're hoping to launch the outreach next month, I believe, if all goes well. And so there's an opportunity for tenants to participate in the general application process for the Tenant Advisory Committee. Specific to tenant board members, we will be working with the governance team to ensure that a motion be brought forward, ideally to the next board meeting, that recommends 2 members of the current board sit on that tenant advisory committee, 2 tenant board members.
Thank you.
Marcel, did you have a comment? Question?
Yes. I've noticed a number of the tenant surveys that have been presented to the committees and the board since I've been here. There seems to be like a running theme, like of dissatisfaction with services, dissatisfaction with feeling safe in the communities. If you're going to be looking at how to make those improvements, have you just like maybe thought about looking back on those previous reports and find out what it is specifically that were concerns for the community? And then when you've done your other survey or satisfaction thing, to see if there's been any kind of change in that, or is that the same concerns and the same dissatisfaction? Is it running through into the next survey and the next report? Because there is like a pattern, right? So it'd be good to take a look at the things that maybe that weren't working before, and are they being repeated again? And then, how can you change that so that people can actually start seeing a bit of a change, if that makes sense?
So through the chair, thank you for your comment, Director Charlebois. Completely agree with you. The specifics of the survey in this report was conducted at the tenant forum, and it was related to the tenant engagement system. And so it's an opportunity for us to ask more specific questions and continue with the trending. There were a couple of questions, I believe, in the tenant satisfaction, the overall tenant satisfaction, that touched on this, but this is a bit more specific. We will absolutely look back at historical feedback and survey results before informing any recommendations to the new tenant engagement system, but duly noted. Thank you.
Any other committee members with comments, questions? I have a... yeah.
Sorry, I just want to
Sure.
make one comment, John.
Yep.
To Mohammed, that it won't be individual directors bringing back material or bringing that back to the board. It will come as a board report from the Tenant Advisory Committee. So just establishing what the role of the committee is, what the role of any of the directors would be. And I think Mike is on John Campbell.
I didn't do that on purpose.
I know you didn't.
All right, so I have a question of staff, and so that on page 7 of 10 of the report, page 117, we refer to the community action plans, and a high level of dissatisfaction there, and then of course in your your survey results, there was dissatisfaction with tenant engagement. In regard to the tenant action plans first, why were people so dissatisfied?
So through the chair, it varies. We had, in some instances, where the tenant developed with staff the community action plan 2 to 3 years ago with very little follow-up, given COVID and focus on elections in other communities. And so it may be related to feeling that the plan didn't gain momentum, or there wasn't an opportunity to actually action it. That might be a level. We also have like one of the comments I heard was, well, community safety challenges to building conditions are sort of everybody's issues, and so instead of making these the priority issues in a community action plan, why don't we look at building specific issues? So it varies from tenant to tenant, but I think the overall gist is that we didn't necessarily respond in a timely enough fashion to make it an actionable plan that the community could get behind, and so that is something that the teams are working on now.
And did people appreciate the fact that we were coming to listen to them?
I would say it was, all of the forums were really well received, and we had some really challenging and contentious panels where tenants were deeply dissatisfied with a variety of services and challenges they're having. But I think subsequent to that panel and ongoing discussions, I feel like a lot of momentum was gained through those sessions, and we want to continue to do that work. This was our first attempt to kind of bring folks together in such a large fashion post-COVID, and I think it's critical to tenant engagement moving forward.
And so does staff plan to, I think these were great forums. They looked like they, the people that signed up, most of them showed up, which was really, really great. Does staff intend to do this again later this year, or will it be next year? What's the timeline for the continued engagement?
So we do. There's local community action tables. So that was the precursor to these forums that were held. That's a bit more open house style. So tenants can kind of walk in. I believe that's planned in the next couple of months. We are looking to do potentially a citywide forum, COVID and public health restrictions contingent, that will allow us to present recommendations on changes before we bring it back to this committee. So the hope is to get that done probably early fall, to have a citywide forum.
Great. Thank you. Okay, if there are any other questions of staff or comments? Okay, not seeing any, then we need a motion to receive the report. Moved by Mohammed, all in favor? Great. And just as we close off that item, I'm glad Uba raised it, but really pleased to see the vacancy rate come down so low. It shows a lot of hard work by staff. And the results are, it's paying off the hard work. So it's really, that's the best trend in the report. Dara, did you have something? Oh, well, thank you.
Sorry, just in relation to the report on item 10D, we've incorporated into the report recommendations that reflect the direction the council has provided the board in terms of actions that it needs to take to advance the tenant advisory committee work, and so it's not just a motion to receive. That was all.
Oh, sorry, you're right. There's recommendations there. Okay, so the recommendations were, we'll say they were moved by Mohammed, and then all in favor. That's great. And then I believe that concludes the, sorry? The inspections report. Oh, yes, the annual, 10D, right, okay, 10D. Annual unit inspections report. Any comments or questions on the information provided there? Councillor Fletcher?
Yes. Yeah, there are a significant number of units with, your mic's on again, John. Almost 2,000 units with, I'll call them housekeeping, clutter, hoarding, that. That's quite a few. So I'd just like to know what the plans are for those, because that's, I think, where when some of the fires have started, there's been excessive clutter and problems. And 7 to 9 is, well, you can only get to 10, so we know that that's pretty big. What are the steps that are taken, etc., because they are difficult issues for staff, difficult issues for the other tenants living in the building, fire safety hazard, etc.
So through the chair, thank you for the question, Councillor Fletcher. I will ask Senior Director of Business Operations, Richard Grosch, to speak to that.
Through the chair to you, Councillor. The unit condition has all been automated within the new home system. So as soon as those inspections are identified as a fail, The system automates a work order and it assigns it to the tenant service coordinator and the community service coordinator. It triggers a process in which the staff commence a follow-up. So in some cases, it will be a warning letter. In other cases, it will be something more significant, all of which require a follow-up inspection 14 days after the letter is issued. Some of those cases are resolved almost immediately, where others will be multiple engagement of those households. In some cases, it's even joint visits with our partners at Toronto Public Health to engage.
So for units with clutter 7 to 9, obviously those are the most severe. You have numbers here, 106, 121, 165. That's from 2022. So can you tell me the rate or the numbers that were dealt with and sorted out of those in the 3 areas? Please.
Through the chair, I would have to come back with an update as to the resolution rate to date, but that is the number of work orders that were generated.
I think I'm really interested, and it's great to have the number of work orders, but Mr. Chair, I want to know the resolution rate, because if it's only 10%, are these chronic? Was this from the time before? So what kind of special consideration is required? And it's only because of the issue, which I'm sure you would agree, fire and pest management are 2 of the biggest concerns with that level of clutter, correct? Considered a hoarding situation.
Through the chair, you're absolutely correct, and I'll be prepared to provide those numbers at the board level.
And perhaps we can just, when we have annual ones, we can really make sure and how we're managing that, and if Spider needs to go in, but it is very difficult. And you would agree it's very hard for the rest of the tenants in the building and quite dangerous. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions on the item, we'll move to receive the report. Moved by Mohammed. All in favor? Right. That concludes the agenda, and a motion to adjourn is all.
Before we adjourn, is it the board's intention to treat Director Hawk's motion as applying to 10A and 10B as well? I don't think we had motions on those reports.
Sorry, you want to run that by me again?
We moved through reports on items 10A, B, and C. I think you've got a motion from Director Hawk for 10C and one for 10D. I don't know that I heard any motions for 10A and B, which were...
Oh, I thought we did that. All right, so, well, motion, okay, sorry. So we'll have motion to receive. Was it receive 10A and B? Moved by Director Hawk, and all in favor, okay? And then Marcel, a motion to adjourn. All right, and all in favor, and great. Thank you, staff.
Good motion, Marcel. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Bye,
Yes.
everybody.
And